Hey, it's Ben from Digital Mastery and Masters Academy, and I'm going to show you how I captured an architectural image and made a rather dramatic black and white out of it. So let's dive in and get started. So first off, here is the situation. Here I'm in Google Maps and Street View, and this is the building that caught my eye. Now, I'm a little bit into brutalist architecture just because in photographs it can make for an interesting image. And in this case, most of the time when I have a building that is of this height, I would want to shoot it from maybe about this far away. And by doing so, I might be able to capture an image and not have to tilt my camera up. If I have to tilt my camera up, then these verticals that are here are going to end up starting to converge at the top, where it looks smaller at the top, bigger at the bottom. And I usually want to avoid that. So in this case though, there's all sorts of stuff in front of the building, and the building itself from a distance just doesn't do that much for me. So I decided to go for something much more dramatic than a standard architectural shot, and so I got up close. Now when you get up close, you'll see that you can only get up in this area here where there's a little railing, and that really forces you really close to the architecture. So let's see what happened and what we ended up with. So over here in Lightroom, here is the first shot that I got, and this is when you're backed up near the railing that was there. And you can see that you really have to tilt the camera rather extremely, and so at this point it's kind of doesn't make sense to try to maintain straight vertical lines. Instead, you're going to get that converging at the top kind of feeling, and so you might as well go with it. And notice we did have some other things in the scene. Now, one of the issues I had to think about here is the sun. The sun is right about up here in the upper left of the image, and anytime it's kind of noonday sun pointing straight into the lens, I'm going to get an awful lot of lens flare, which is what all this is. If I want to avoid that, I would usually use my hand, and I would cast a shadow from my hand onto the lens of the camera. So if the light is not hitting the front element of my lens directly, then I would avoid this lens flare. But I was just trying to figure out an okay composition. And so here's another one, but I really didn't like the street post that's in there, and I'm still getting some lens flare over in here, and you can see a few dots of it over there. So I took a few pictures of my wife. In this case, I was shooting with, if I look at the lens over here on the right, let's see, this was a 12 to 24 millimeter, which is an extreme wide angle. And so when shooting with an extreme wide angle, anything near the edge of your frame can get distorted quite a bit, especially when you're tilting up on architecture. So my wife looks extremely skinny and tall. She is skinny, but she ain't that tall. So anyway, this is what I did. I did do a few yoga pictures for her, and what I did to accomplish those is I just got a little closer to the ground. And here's just a sequence of those. But when I was done shooting her doing her little fun, I decided to take a shot of the building itself. And once I really started tilting up, so it's not a slight tilt where I'm trying to minimize it, but I'm going with it. I'm really embracing the fact that I'm tilting up. Then I go for extremes. I get a little closer to the building. But in this case, there's a lot of busy stuff down here at the bottom that can distract my eye. So I decided to minimize this stuff at the bottom and frame it up a little bit differently. And in this case, I'm starting to get a relatively clean image. What I don't like about this image is the building on the right, which could easily be retouched out. And I think I'm just not quite even. If you look on this side, you see this curved area coming in and hitting this piece of concrete, whereas on the other side, I don't have the space for that. I can't see the same intersection. So I tried to clean that up a little bit more and ended up with this. So now I can see both of the terminuses of that part of concrete. The other thing I did, if I back up one shot, is if you look at the sun, I started trying to deal with the lens flare. And in this case, the sun is positioned right in here, and I thought that that would get rid of the lens flare because the sun wouldn't be directly hitting the front element of my lens. But then when I was recomposing this to really clean it up, I also was very careful with where the sun was. I tried to get just enough of it to show through here that I would get a starburst. Now, most of the time I need to stop down my lens to like f22 to get a good starburst. But if I remember correctly in this case, I was shooting at only f8, and I still got a bit of a starburst. So in this image, this is the one I'm actually going to process. I don't like the building in the upper right, so I might need to retouch that out. I have that street light right up here, but that's easy to retouch out. And it's hard to say, I might retouch out some of this greenery. It all depends if it distracts my eye in the end. So now let's dive in. I'm going to use Lightroom for this, but anything I do in Lightroom you can do in Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to go to the Develop module. And the first thing I want to deal with is getting the image cropped and straightened. And I can tell I wasn't perfectly straight here, and that will make it so this image will never be perfectly geometrically perfect. But I have two options. The first one is I can go to my crop tool. And in the crop tool here is a little angle tool. And if I click on that, I could drag across the image to tell it what I would like to be level. And what I might do in this case is go to where this concrete here matches the other piece of concrete, right where the two touch. I'd click there and I'd drag to the exact same spot on the other side. And by doing so, it'll make that straight line and it'll make that nice and straight. Then I could drag this in, and maybe I want to bring this up so I get rid of a lot of that stuff at the bottom. Bring this out. If it doesn't allow me to bring it out, I just need to grab it by the corner up here and see what I can end up with. And maybe bring that down a bit. So that's one option. And let's say I'm not sure if I want to go with that or not, because I have one other option I'd like to try. So what I'm going to do is in the upper left up here, I'm going to create a snapshot. And I'm just going to call it crop 1. I'll hit create. And then since the only thing I've done to this image is crop it, I'm just going to go to the lower right and choose reset so I can start over again. And I'm going to now try my second choice on how to crop the image. And that would be to try to kind of undistort the image a little bit more than just simply rotating the angle it was captured from. And I'm going to do that in this area here that's called transform. So there we have many different choices that are here, but when you're shooting at an extreme angle like this, most of these choices won't be useful except for this one called guided. With guided, I can move my mouse on top of the image, and just like when I tried to level something, I can click on that same spot over here, right where one piece of concrete meets another, and I can drag to the same area on the other side. But it's not going to do anything with just one line defined. I need to define a second line that should also be at the same angle as that. And so I'm going to pick another area. Now I could pick up here near the top of the building, but that's pretty close by this other line. If I were to work further down, like down here or down here, it would be more effective. So down here I can see these little concrete squares that are on both sides. And so if I go to the corner of where those end, right here, and I drag to the opposite corner of where they end, right there, that's pretty far away from that other line, and therefore it'll be able to do the best correction. But that didn't end up getting this to be just right, because I can tell that this portion is not really centered, and that's due to the angle I shot it at. So what I'm going to do there is here I can see the center of this building, and I'm going to go right to where that seam is, right about there, and I'm going to drag way up here, and right about there I can also see that same seam right there. It's not the same seam, but it's one that would be centered, and I can just eyeball it all the way up the building to make sure it visually looks to be centered right about there, and then I'll let go. And so that was a different way of having it straighten the building. Now there are other things it can do in here. I'm going to put back this little guided feature by clicking back in this little circle. And I would like to do a few things. The first thing is Lightroom is incapable of changing the dimensions of my picture other than cropping it. It can't add space to the width and height. It can't add more pixels when it comes to using these features. So once it's done this correction, there's part of the image that's going beyond the bounds of this document. And it's just trying to create the largest rectangular area that's usable. But I can manipulate that and I can see what's beyond the edges using the other sliders that are found right down in here. If you want to see everything, just grab the scale slider and move it down. And you can see what kind of correction that it made. And sometimes I turn that scale way down while I'm adjusting the other sliders, because if we're cropped in tight on this and I move some of the other sliders, it's going to start pushing more of the information beyond the edge of my screen. So let's take a look at what the other sliders do. First, we have X and Y offset, and all that does is move the picture. So if I move the X offset, you see it moving to the left or to the right, and the Y offset would move it either down or up. And so if once you're done cropping, you have just a little bit of the image cut off on one side, sometimes that's useful. Then these choices called vertical and horizontal, they will attempt to get rid of the keystoning if I wanted to tilt it one direction or the opposite to try to fix it. But in this case, I'm kind of embracing the fact that we have that converging lines, although I might adjust a little bit. And then horizontal is useful if you shot it at an off angle. You're a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right of center. Then it would swing it a bit for you. But in this case, I'm going to leave those. Then we have rotate, which is pretty obvious. It just rotates your picture. But this one called aspect is one I really like when I have an image like this. It's going to stretch the picture in one dimension, either horizontally or vertically. And in this case, I think I want this image to look a bit more like almost a panorama where it's exaggerated. So I'm going to take the aspect, and if I moved it to the right, it would squish the image. And if I move it to the left, it will expand it. I think I like it when I'm moving it to the left like that. So I'm going to have that. All right, now I don't want to crop this, because if I crop this, the width and height of my image in pixels will go down. If, on the other hand, I crop this by scaling and moving it within the framing we already have, then I'm going to maintain the full original size of the picture. So I'm going to start bringing this up with scale, and I notice it's a little bit off-centered. So that's when I'll go down here to the X offset, and I'm just going to move it over until it's approximately centered. Then I can come back up to scale and continue with it. And I'm going to get this, I'm looking on the far left and far right. I'm going to move this just a little bit more off to the side to get that centered. All right. And then we'll bring up scale some more until the left and right are close to what I want for cropping. And I would say somewhere around there. Once I have one of the widths defined, the height or the width, then I can go up here and crop. Because I've defined the maximum I'm going to use in one dimension. Now I just need to define the maximum I'm going to use in the opposite direction. We'll bring that down, or bring this one up. And I think I want to get rid of as much of this part down here at the bottom as is practical, because it's just kind of distracting and it doesn't really give me the shapes that really attracted me to this building in the first place. So I might bring us up to approximately there. Now I do have this area on the side that I could try to fill in Photoshop, but I'm not going to be able to do anything really about it here in Lightroom. So I'm going to make it so that that's not visible. And to do so, I think I'm just going to bring in my cropping and decide probably about there. If I want it cropped any less, I'd have to pull this up a little closer. Let's get it really close to that curved part at the bottom. Then we can max this out. If you want to prevent it from being able to go beyond the edge there, then there is an option right here called Constrain to Image. And if I click on that, now it won't let me pull it out beyond. And now I'm just going to make it even on the other side. About there. And maybe see if I can pull down. All right, about like that. Now let's make another snapshot. I'll just go over here to the left side of my screen and I'm going to call it crop 2. Hit create. And I'm not sure which of those two I'm going to like better because I was just experimenting. And so let's compare the two. To compare the two, let's get out of the crop tool so we can see the finished cropped image. And then down here at the bottom, there are some choices, and one of them has two Y's next to each other. If I click on that, we can see two images side by side, thought of as the before and the after. And if you either click more than once, you can change your view, or there's a little menu to the right of it where you can choose between these views. And I'm making mine top and bottom so we can easily fit them. Then there are some icons we can use here. Right here where it says before and after. I'm going to take it and take this particular image and I could push it up here. And I do that with this little arrow pointing up. And therefore we'd have one of my end results up there at the top. Right now these two images are identical because I pushed a copy of this up to the top. But then I can come over here to my snapshots and I can apply the other snapshot to what's considered the after version of the image, which is the image at the bottom. And now we have that. And unfortunately it changed them both. I didn't want it to. So I got to figure out why. Well, that doesn't make sense to me, that it is trying to apply the snapshot to both the top and the bottom at the same time, but it's not fully doing it. I think I found a bug in Photoshop. Because this is not what our original image looked like at the time I made that snapshot. I think I had it cropped in tighter than that, and we had just some rotation applied. So I'm going to have to do this a different way. How am I going to do it differently? I'll go back to the library module. And I'm going to make it so we have two versions of this picture. I'll right-click on this version. I'm going to choose Create Virtual Copy, and then we'll have two versions of our picture. And with that second version selected, I'll go to my Develop module, and I don't need before and after, so I'll just click on this icon on the lower left to get back to a single view, and let's apply Crop to that one. Then let's go back to the library module, and I should have two images. They're cropped differently. I could select both. I have one selected already. I'll hold Shift and get the other. And then down here, I can compare them side by side. And therefore I can get a sense for the difference. In looking at the difference, it's a little bit of a toss-up depending on what you're into, but I'm kind of liking the wide version of the image. So I think I'm going to go for that one, and that's the one I'm going to process. And so let's go back to our grid. I just typed the letter G to get back to the grid, and we're going to go for the image on the right, which is our virtual copy. I'll click on that so it's the only one I'm working on, and then let's head back into Develop and let's process this image. Now, if you look at the image and just look at where your eye gets pulled to, most of the time I find my eye goes to the area of greatest contrast. That's where there's really bright and really dark next to each other. And that would be somewhere near the sun, because there's dark things and bright things there, or the edge of the building here. Also, my eye is drawn to color. So the blue up here pulls me in, and the little hint of green in this corner pulls me in. So let's deal with those corners. The first thing I want to know is, might it be worth trying to get the left side of the sky to look like the right side and have blue over there? To find out, I'm going to come up here to my basic adjustments, and I'm just going to lower the exposure way down to see, does anything show up? And something shows up, but not really where the sun was. You can see that I just had my exposure too bright to capture detail in that area. Sure, if I went to Photoshop, I'd be able to go in and retouch something in, but I'm thinking I'm not going to end up trying to do that, because I want to finish this image off just using Lightroom. So instead, I want this area here to turn white so it looks like the other side of the image. Well, to do so, I'm going to just come in here and go to this area called HSL. I'll expand it, and there I'm going to find various colors listed. And we have headings of hue, saturation, and luminance. I'll head for luminance because that just means brightness, and we'll go for blues and just bring it up until I don't see any detail there. So now I don't mind that side of the image. Next, let's deal with what's in the upper left. Now, when it comes to retouching, Lightroom can do okay retouching things that are in the corner edge of your picture. But you got to be careful when you've cropped your image, because it's going to be thinking about what's outside the cropping rectangle as well. So I'm going to click on my crop tool just to see what's out there. And since this is a white sky, I think I can just copy some information from over here and move it over there to cover that up. But if I was going to use something like the healing setting, then it would attempt to blend in with what's out here, and it wouldn't quite look right. So let's go to our retouching tool. In my retouching tool, what I'm going to do is come over here and just paint over the area, go a little bit beyond the edge in case I ever adjust my crop, and then I'm going to tell it to copy from the middle of the photo. And I don't know that my sky is perfectly white yet because I could see the tiniest difference, so I'll just make sure this is set to clone. Clone means copy directly without trying to blend in with the surroundings, whereas heal I think is going to leave a hint of green up there in the corner. That has to do with that there's still green beyond the edge that it would try to blend with. And then I'll bring up my feathering just a little bit so that if it's not exactly the same as its surroundings, at least there won't be a crisp edge there. And so now we got that corner clean. Now at this point, if you look at the color that's in the image, we have a hint of brown in the building, we have a hint of blue in the windows that you could barely see that are here, but I don't think they're really adding anything to the image. So I'm going to go under my basic tab and I'm going to click on black and white. And also when I'm in black and white is when I'm going to notice a few issues. Like over here, my retouching no longer blends in. So I might need to return to that tool we used previously, come on up here and click and see if I need to reposition this or need to make a different kind of a change. So to fix that, instead of trying to redo my retouching and all that, this is a black and white image. We've suspended reality already, so let's just get the entire right side of the sky to be white. I've come down here to the area called B and W, and it reset this when I ended up converting because it kind of ignored the brightening of the sky that I used. And so here under B and W, that's what replaced the old one that had hue, saturation, and luminosity. I'm just going to bring the blues back up, and therefore that whole right side of the sky is going to get bright again. That's also going to make it so the area it was copying from here is brighter, so it matches what's over there. So it was just it resetting when I went to black and white. All right, then let's process the image. And I don't think it needs all that much. What I'm going to do is probably bring up clarity a bit. Clarity is going to make these shapes become more defined. So they're going to stand out a little bit more. And with black and white, you can get rid of, or you can get away with much higher clarity settings than you can with color images because you're already suspending reality. Then I look at this image and I want to make the bottom portion of the image down here in the corners to be darker because my eye gets drawn to the detail that's down there, but that's really not where I want your eye to be. I want your eye to be up in here. So let's go to our adjustment tool. And they've changed this in the newest version of Lightroom, which was just released at the end of October 2021. We used to have multiple tools up here for doing masking, and now we just have one icon. And once you clicked on that icon, here you have some masking choices, and there's our old brush tool, so I'm going to use it. I'm going to make sure auto mask is turned off just so I can freeformly paint, and I'll make sure both flow and density are at 100. That means wherever I paint, give the full effect of whatever adjustment I'm going to put in. And then I'm going to make my feathering kind of a medium amount so it fades out a bit on the edge. I'm going to come down here to the lower right and I'm just going to click and drag like this. It's putting a colored overlay in because I haven't dialed in any kind of an adjustment yet. So I'm just kind of previewing the area that I might be applying this. There we go. Then that overlay will likely go away when I start adjusting these sliders, but it really depends. This little show overlay checkbox is turned on, so it might not. Let's find out. I'll grab my white slider. Good, it did. In the old version, it wouldn't. I would have had to type the letter O, but in this new version, it does. So I'm going to bring down the whites. Whites works on the brightest part of the picture, and therefore we can get that to be darkened up. I'll also bring my highlights down because that'll concentrate on bright areas. And then if that's not enough, I'll bring my exposure a bit until I don't want it to feel like it's black because that won't look natural. But I'm going to just make it so you have to spend a bit of energy in order to see that detail that's in there. I'd say that's good enough. Then I'd like your eye to explore this middle central portion of the image a little bit more than some of the other spots. So over here where we talk about our brushes, this brand new panel for this version of Photoshop, first I'm going to name the area we've already adjusted. Here's the mask for it. If I hover over it, you'll see it's in the corners. Here's the name for the mask. I'll just double click and I'm going to call this Corners Dark. Click OK. And then I'm going to click this plus button. When I do, it'll ask me what kind of a adjustment I'd like to put in, like how I want to isolate an area. And I'm going to go for my brush. And this time I'm going to make sure my feathering's turned all the way up, so I got a really soft brush, and I'm going to paint kind of in this central portion right in here. Because this is part of where I want your eye to be drawn, and I'm going to do that by making sure that that area has some brighter areas within it. But when I did that, notice that a little bit of my paint got on top of the sky. I don't think that's going to matter in the end, but let's just say it did. Let's say we had a blue sky in there and I didn't want to brighten that blue sky. Well, what I can do is come up here to our mask, and usually you'll see some features below the mask. If you don't, just click on this little icon, this thumbnail, and it'll cause this stuff to show up. Click again, it'll go away. Then I'm going to say I want to take away from our mask, and I can now say I want to take away the sky. And so let's do that. Take it just a moment, and now notice that the green does not overlay the sky. And therefore, any change that I make to this area shouldn't affect the sky, which is great. Let's double click on this name of the mask, and we'll just call this Brighten Center, just so I remember why it's there. And then we haven't actually made a change yet, so let's come over here and dial in a change. I want the area to be slightly brighter, so I'm going to go with my whites and bring it up slightly. That works on the brightest area of the image. It makes it even brighter. And I'm not going to do it dramatically, just a little hint to pull your eye to that spot. Then another area that I'd like to work on is where the sun is over here. I want the sun to pop a little bit more, so you notice the starburst that's around it a little more. Since that's a different area of the picture, I'll come up here to the top of the mask panel, say I want a new mask, and I want to use my brush to do so. And I'll get a smaller brush. I'm just using 2 fingers on my trackpad and dragging down to get a smaller brush. You could have also used the scroll wheel on a mouse to do that. And I'll just paint on top of that. And over here on the right, I have a few options I could use, but I think I'm going to go for clarity. Clarity is going to add some contrast to that area. I'll just bring it up until my eye gets drawn to it enough. All right, I think that's good for my selective adjustments. So I'm going to click on the masking icon to get out of that and get back to adjusting our picture. Now I want to make sure the sky is white, and I'm not sure if it is yet or not. I'll hover over it, and up here just below the histogram, I can see some numbers. And if they don't read out 100, then it's not white. It's really close to white in that area, and it gets to be white about here. Well, I don't want like half the sky white and half just a little bit darker. I want the whole sky white. So I could do that with my adjustment brush if I wanted to. So let's go back to our masking. I'll just click on the masking icon once again. Let's say I want a new mask, and let's tell it to select the sky for me. That's a new feature. And there we got our sky, but notice part of the building is also highlighted, and I don't want to change that part of the building. So let's get the other options for this mask. Remember, you can toggle those options by clicking on this, and I'm going to say subtract from the mask we currently have, and I don't feel like painting over the building to get rid of it, so when I choose subtract, I'm going to tell it to subtract the subject of the photograph, and therefore Lightroom will try to figure out what the subject is and will remove it from this mask. Take it just a second, and it got rid of most of it. There's just the tiniest part right at the very top if I hover over the mask that I see, so I might say again let's subtract, but this time let's subtract using a brush. And I'll grab my brush. With my brush, I don't want to have to be careful up there, so I'm going to turn on auto mask, and therefore it's going to look at what's in the center of my brush, and it's going to try to only remove stuff that's similar to what's in the center. I'll get it onto the little darker part of that top of the building. I'll click, and let's see. Maybe one more click near the left side. If you try to come in here and go over an area and you find that it's highlighting something and it's because there's an icon overlaying the image, just type the letter H. H means hide those icons. If you type it again, they'll come back. So if I type H, then I can't accidentally click on that icon. And I might be able to come in here a little closer, click, and get rid of that other portion. So now I think I got a pretty good mask of my sky, and it didn't take all that much work because of the new masking features that were in here. I'm going to come up here and name my mask by double clicking on the name, and I'll just call this sky to white. Click OK. And then I'm going to bring up the white slider. That controls the brightest portion of the image and makes it even brighter. Now I can usually tell when I've gotten the sky to be white. And I can tell by looking at the histogram. In the histogram, this tells us what brightness ranges are used within our picture. And with that, black is on the left, white is on the right. And so you notice that there's really tall parts in the histogram. Just before it hits the far right would be white. That tells me we have large areas of 99% gray, 98, 97, and 96. But watch what happens when I bring whites up. You see that starting to go, and once it goes to a single line, a single pixel thickness, I know my entire sky is likely to be white because there is not a large area that is just a little bit darker. But we can confirm it. Just move your mouse on top of the sky, and I see it says 100 right below the histogram. And if I go all the way across my sky, it's consistent all the way across. And therefore, we have a nice white sky. You can hover over the mask to see which portion of the image you're affecting and double check that it looked pretty good, and I think it does. So let's get out of that mask. The other thing I want to make sure is that we have at least a small area of solid black. If you don't have solid black in your image, then if your image is displayed next to somebody else's and theirs does have solid black, then your image is going to look kind of hazy. It's going to look dull. And so I want my images to look more consistent when they're next to each other, and I almost always try to make it so I have a very small area of solid black in the image. I don't need that for every image, but unless the image is supposed to look hazy, then I'm usually going to do it. The same is not true for white, but let's work with this. So I'm going to go to my black slider. And there's a hidden feature within this. If you hold down the Option key, Alt and Windows, which I have held down right now, and you click on the black slider, it will show you where within the image you have black. And notice there's a couple little specks on the right side of the screen if I let go of my mouse, but not much. I usually try to bring it down until it's not just a speck, it's a tiny blob. And so on the left side of my image, about 3/4 of the way over, I'm starting to see a blob. I don't want it to be all that big, but I want it to be more than just 1 pixel or 2 sitting next to each other. So maybe about there is a good amount. So now I know that I have the darkest area being solid black. And at this point, I'm liking the image as a whole. And I just want to have a little bit more personality. This is kind of brutalist architecture, which has really got a cold feeling. And so I want the image to feel rather cold. To do so, I'm going to come down here to an area called color grading. And this is where I can push some color into our image. And now what I think I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to go for the dark portion of the image, and I'm going to push a little blue into it. So this is labeled shadows for the dark area of the image, and I'm just going to drag this little circle towards blue. Usually I drag it quite a distance just to get a sense for, am I getting purple, am I getting blue, am I getting cyan, and see what I like. And once I find what I like, maybe somewhere right about there, I let go, and then when I grab this again, it's going to try to not move away from that color. It's going to try to let me just go towards the middle or towards the outer edge, and it's only if I move a radical amount that it'll let me swing to those other colors. So now I'm going to drag towards the middle and back to the outside, and usually I go for less than I think I need. Otherwise, you usually end up overdoing it. So maybe about there. I don't want it to be necessarily noticeable, but it is going to influence the overall feeling of the image. If you want to see what it looks like without it, there's this little light switch up here next to the word color grading, and if I turn that off, you can see just the straight black and white. And if I click it again, we'll turn it on, and you can see just that little hint of coolness. So that should give you an idea for how I ran into a scene. You saw the building from a distance, you saw how I walked up to it and general thought process, and how I ended up testing multiple crops and processing the image. Now, I didn't cover the details on how I think about too many of the sliders. If you want me to get into that, then you'd have to check out my other website, which is mastersacademy.com. I'm Ben Wilmore. I'll see you next time.